having fun, we're chatting, we're a lovely lot of time. It's a little bit, it's going to get quite techy, and Tim's going to give a talk about WPAPI. So it's, yeah, a little bit different. How long do you need to do the talk, Tim? We're fine. All right, okay. We're fine. Verbal on for 5 minutes or so, and then you can do your bit. Second half, we're going to get a bit more technical. Tim's going to talk about the WP API, which is a JSON REST API for WordPress. He'll explain what all those words mean if you don't know. But I'm quite excited about it. I actually downloaded it, installed it on one of my test servers the other day, and then I had a very, very quick play with it in the command line, and that's as far as I got, but I do fancy a quick play with it. Tech news. No, I haven't really got any, although, well, as Tim might tell you, this looks quite interesting. It might make it in 4.1. It's heading for, maybe. But then again, it was supposed to be in 3.9, was it? 3.8. Oh, was it originally supposed to be 3.8? Cool. That's good to know. Excellent. Just a reminder for those, especially for those who weren't here earlier, we've got the Tech Hub. We're doing Tech Hub, and then we start there and we go to events. So Jenny has organised a Drupal and WordPress sprint for this coming Sunday. So, sorry? Saturday. Was it? Oh, I might even be able to spend less time there. I thought it was Sunday. Oh, that explains the confused conversation I had earlier on with somebody. Okay. Saturday, apparently. Who knew? I would have turned up on Sunday. I was convinced. Oh, that means nothing. I don't even know what month it is. I don't know what date it is. Sorry? There we go. I should look at the Sunday. But yeah, so this is the sprint get together for like-minded developers, themers, and UXers who are passionate about community and want to give back. We might even have some Joomla people. Did I hear? Okay, more Joomla people than WordPress people. That's definitely. If you've got a local setup and you fancy hacking on some WordPress, fixing some bugs, contributing to some code, definitely come along to that. It'll be good fun. I will be there for some of the afternoon apparently. I would have been there longer for Sunday, but Saturday. That's definitely worth coming to. And hopefully it's going to be the first of many, possibly as often as monthly. See how it goes. Be cool. And one of the reasons behind it actually is we've run a number of contributor days now, which is about helping people understand how they can contribute to WordPress, whether it's coding or various other things as well, and helping them get set up and teach them about it. One of the things is that people go away with the idea, yeah, great, I'm going to be able to contribute to WordPress, and then don't find the time. So the idea of this is to just set aside some time, forget you can't find an hour a week or 2 hours a week, and you keep promising you will. Let's make it just 1 day a month. Get together and just concentrate the whole day and get some contribution done, and you'll feel better about yourself and make the WordPress world a lot better. And these days, contributing to WordPress means you're affecting 22% of the whole internet. So that can't be enough. Can it? You make WordPress better. You make the internet, and that's the world, isn't it? The world's better. So definitely think about that. I don't know if anybody else has got any tech news that I've probably heard of and forgotten and not remembered to talk about today. But otherwise, not. I'll hand it over to Tim.
You should probably go and set this up really quick.
That's true.
Smart
okay.
and so I
can
can't get out.
Different?
Yeah, it's a thing, so I'm probably an old style one.
Doesn't feel like. backward for consistency.
Oh, it's nice down here. You should all come down here. It's got a big fan.
But it does stop me hearing things. So, yeah, as I said, Tim can talk about WPAPI. I believe you taught me that I'm really well at work at Manchester. Because I know it's different.
It's completely unrelated.
Oh, yeah, no. But he's a good, he does a lot of talks and he's a good talker. I like his job. Right.
I'm just checking this is going to be paid.
Yeah, it's going, okay.
This presentation may contain a few puns. Just to warn you, they're bad, they're not good jokes. I was tired when I came up. So it's time for a rest. My name is Tim, for the few people here who might not know who I am. I have all those words associated with me, but I'm primarily a WordPress developer, and I go around talking a lot, mainly at WordPress user groups and WordCamps and things like that. I also run WordPress Leads, which Mike hasn't mentioned once tonight. For anybody who wants to come, it's Tuesday. There's also WordPress New York tomorrow if you want to come. It's the first WordPress user group in York, first meetup. But today I'm going to talk to you about REST. So, WordPress already has several APIs in this, and I'll get to what they do and how they interact. But basically, an API itself is an acronym for Application Programming Interface. An API is simply a way for one software to communicate with another in a fixed way. Now, originally, these were designed as really simple protocols to pass a piece of text, or rather bytes, across to each other in a standard interface, so that when they pass it over once to one location, the next time they pass it to the location, it was going to be there as well. In effect, these were standardized so that whatever happened behind in the gubbins behind, there was always an interface for the software to interact with. Then, software got much more complicated. To the point that actual software, within the software, it needed APIs inside it to interact with different parts of the software itself. And then inside those, and then inside those, and then inside those. To the point that now everything has an API to talk to it just to itself. So, and an API can be literally anything. Within WordPress core, I think at the last check, there were 146 named APIs interacting just inside WordPress. So this gives you an idea. There's lots of things doing lots of communication and lots of talking. So, what's a RESTful API? Well, it's really a simplistic, it's a stateless system that's designed to be really simple. Now, it doesn't have to use HTTP, but the vast majority of REST APIs use HTTP, which is something we're all familiar with. Every time you go into your browser, you type www.example.com, you're using HTTP, because that's when you go and click, you'll often see in the corner the come up saying HTTP there. If you're doing it over SSL, you probably see HTTPS. But the HTTP specification gives us lots of verbs. In particular, it gives us GET, which we're all very used to. That's what happens when you go into our browser. You're probably used to using POST, which is if you use a form, normally when you submit that data on a form, it's probably submitted as a POST request. If it's submitted as a GET request, you probably see it up in your browser toolbar at the top. Something you might not be familiar with is this put, delete, patch, and head. These are all part of the HTTP spec that most browsers don't implement, but a lot of other systems do use. So, how many of you have heard of curl and wget? Curl is almost the vast majority. For those of you who haven't, don't worry, they're just mechanisms for retrieving data by making calls to HTTP resources and saying, hey, I want that data. So with curl, you could just do curl HTTP www.example.com, and it will retrieve whatever example.com gives it back. So when we talk about HTTP verbs and their uses, we're talking, for GET, we're talking about retrieving a resource. For POST, we're asking to update a resource. For PUT, we're either creating a new resource, which is what most people use it for, but actually PUT technically can also replace the resource entirely. So if I'm putting something there, I'm either putting an object, or if there's an object already there, I'm smashing it out of the way. Delete, probably self-explanatory. Don't need too much here. Funnily enough, browsers don't implement delete. You can possibly think why. Patch. most people get confused because patch seems very much like post and that's one of these. But patch is for updating only part of a resource. And so if you have a big resource document, you can just, by patching, you can replace just one very small part of it without doing a refresh of the entire resource. And head just returns the headers. So we've talked about builds. In terms of formats, well, there's good old HTML, we're quite used to that with our browser. There are many other different formats. You've got JSON, you've got XML, you've got serialized PHP, you've got Atom, you've got microformats, you've got CSV files, you can do images. Basically, a REST server or any can communicate and use anything that a HTTP server can. So you can be downloading PDFs and retrieving these PDFs. I wouldn't recommend it. Certainly don't put your data that you want to use into the PDF, that would be rubbish. So, what about RPC? Somebody mentioned it earlier, XML and RPC. WordPress is already built in. And if anybody's ever tried to use it, it was designed by developers. No, and I'm not the good side of developers, the ones who wanted to keep their jobs. So they made it as complicated as possible so nobody had a chance of getting through. Pretty much exactly the same with SOAP. Actually, SOAP has one useful benefit in that it defines what is going to be there when you make your request. So it effectively tells you before you make a request what's at the end. Whereas with REST, you just make a request to the resource and you get whatever the server gives you back, which can be good and bad. With SOAP, if you don't get what you're expecting, the whole thing falls over and dies horribly. As for Funky API 2.0, well, you'll have to wait until 2015 when that comes out. So, WP API, it currently is a plugin. It's not the first plugin to provide REST API capabilities. Oh, true. That goes to the JSON API, which I used about 5 years ago. It was a brilliant little plugin that provided basic API services. It didn't get much of the community to take up, and it's now a security nightmare, so please don't go and install it. But at the time, it was brilliant, and you could do all sorts of interesting things with it. So that's the first, but we don't use that anymore. Not even the one that's on WordPress.com, which is going to cause problems going forward. So Automatic, via Jetpack, has their own REST API, which has limited features. Remembering this was designed for WordPress.com, so they don't want you necessarily modifying users or other people's sites and things like that. So they obviously reduced the feature set quite a lot to make it usable in their use case. So you might be thinking, well, surely we're going to expand this one, and the world doesn't work like that. So we've got an entirely new one, which is the WP API. It's been rechristened. It used to be the JSON REST API, and it's going to be in core in 4.1. But, and there's always a but, it started with the community server code project as a plugin, and this would be 4 features of plugins really to come. So it's separated out as a plugin, which is a great idea. And it's built in the community, it's built with a lot of respect, but it's also grown bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's lots of components with it, and there was a long process of trying to merge this into core. This process has been more or less now completed. But during the way, there was the small matter of, do we actually want this in core? Do we want 22% of the web to have a REST API? Half of you will go, yes, we do, this is the most important thing ever. And the other half will go, this is extra code loads, I'm not sure about this at all. And this has caused a bit of a problem. It's called a direct fracture amongst the community, who basically wanted people to prove that it would be useful, which is, to be fair, a fair request. And one of the reasons I'm standing in front of you today is to try and beg you to do something to prove that it's going to be useful so we can get it into 4.1. Because if we don't get it into 4.1, this is going to be one of the, I'm going to be back in 6 months' time going, the WP API, it's great, and it's slated to be in 4.6. It has been slated to be in, I think, 3.8, but it might have been 3.9 onwards. So it's been in for several releases, and each time it's been bumped out. So we really do want to keep it in so it gets to 4.1. So what can you do with it? Well, you can retrieve all those verbs I talked about before. You can retrieve, update, delete, and grab head data for just about anything inside your WordPress site. That includes post pages, custom post types, taxonomies, post meta. You can grab all of this information and retrieve it. You can grab information about users, you can grab information about media, comments, and anything you want, because this is the critical thing. It can be extended, as you do. It's a WordPress plugin. So, let's have a look at what it produces. If I go to example.com-wp-post, it will bring back something like this, except hopefully it'll have way more posts in it. Obviously, if you go to example.com, it doesn't do this. For some reason, they're not running a WordPress website. You'd think they would. So this is a JSON object that's been retrieved, but within it, we can see information that we all should be fairly familiar with. We can see IDs, we can see types, we can see statuses, we can see types. I've shrunk this down quite a lot. If you see what I've got for author is, that's a huge other document that suddenly pops in there, and there's various other bits and pieces attached to it. The nice thing about this is if we're, say, using PHP, once we've got this JSON object, all you have to do is do something like JSON decode, and now we have an object. In fact, the only thing that would make this easier for us as PHP developers was if they'd actually produce a serialized PHP. And then we'd only be moaning that they put the wrong type in anyway. So, if I want to get all posts, then I just put /posts. If I want to get an individual post, /post/VID. It's that easy. You can actually navigate to a site that's got WP JSON in the browser to those URLs, and it will give you that data back. You may have seen an obvious flaw in this brilliant plan of both brothers open data. I mentioned custom post types. The one snafu, which is a snag and snafu that happens with WordPress anyway, so this isn't specifically a snafu to do with the API. If I have a custom post type that I don't actually want to be public, I probably should tell the API not to push it and make it public. So if you run a shop and your shop is doing transaction records based on a custom post type, A, get a better shop, but B, make sure you're hiding that information, because it's quite funny when people activate, and there's two particular shop plugins, and I won't name mine with them because it's being recorded and I'll get into trouble. There are two shop plugins that do this, and it's quite fun to spot the sites that are testing WP API. When you go through and go to their custom post type and get them up and go, oh look, customer records. All of them. So just bear that in mind. Which is handy that we've got this thing called authentication. So to authenticate, there's three basic methods for authentication. By default, the API assumes that you can retrieve anything that is public. So if you can get to the end resource as a public user and retrieve that data, then you can probably do that with the API. However, if you want to authenticate as a user with higher privileges, you have three basic ways. The basic HTTP, which requires an additional plugin, via cookies, doesn't require a plugin, and via OAuth, which also requires a plugin, and also WP CLI. But you're not going to be using WP CLI. I gave this talk in Newcastle and then spent the next half an hour telling you how brilliant WP CLI is. Has everybody used it? Anybody used it? Does anybody know it? Yeah. Right, next month, come along to the talk by video on it. I'll skim over what it does. But you really, if you take nothing away from this, you ignore the WP API for a couple of bits and do WP CLI. So let's look at basic auth. Basic auth is, you probably come across it all the time. You go to a website and a little pop-up pops up going, what's your username and password? Exactly the same thing. I mean, we're going to send a header request and saying, base 64 and encoding your username and password. This is not a good way to secure anything. Putting your username and password into a string and sending it over in plain text is a bad idea. You shouldn't be doing this. It's terrible, except for the fact that we will all do it for testing. Because it's by far the simplest thing to do on the planet. But on a production server, this is probably a really bad idea. Don't do it. But yet again, you're going to do it. Don't worry. Everybody knows it, but just don't do it on the live site. Skipping over. Cookie authentication. It's only useful if you're on the same site or you're doing something really funky that I don't want to know about. On the same site, it's really simple. You simply include the JavaScript, WP API JavaScript, and you're done. It handles all the no-once calls, it grabs the WordPress cookie, does all the authentication for you. Absolutely nothing to do. If you're going to do it by hand, well, you'll say this and don't do it. Seriously, just call the WP API JavaScript. If it's on the same server, that will work perfectly. OAuth. OAuth requires a diagram. So, OAuth is pretty simple. It doesn't look simple, but I assure you it is pretty simple. And we'll just click over here. You basically create a consumer to set a token. So we're basically getting a token for our application. You're going, my tokens. Yay! I then use these tokens to generate an OAuth token via WP API. WP CLI, API on that. I then give this token to the user and send them to a specific URL. So in this case, it's an OAuth token. I'll send them there. If they're logged in, they'll come up with a wonderful page that needs some UX design, so please don't worry about it too much. Wonderful page. If not, you'll have to log in with a little page which basically says, authorize my app. When you click OK, they get sent back along with another token. And once we've got this token, we can then use that token to authenticate as that user forever. Or at least until it expires, or more importantly, they tell us that they want it to restart. Or I would tell the server they want it to restart. OAuth is actually really simple once you get used to it. And everybody in this room has used OAuth at some point. Because almost certainly everybody in this room uses Twitter. Or Facebook. Or Google. You all have used OAuth at some point. As a consumer, we're quite used to it, we like it. From a developer side, it's relatively easy to implement. What they've done with WordPress API is that currently the generation of tokens for the developer is done through the command line interface. So this does mean that you need both OAuth and WP CLI installed. It's not too much of a fudge, but if you're on a host that won't give you shell access, this might be more entertaining, and I'm sure you can raise a support ticket and they'll love you for it. So that's a bit about the API, but what can we actually do with it? Well, we can provide remote content to other sites, or the same site, just using different software. How cool is that? Whether it's content marketplaces, and when I said it was simple to consume, I mean it's simple to consume for anything to consume. It doesn't matter what language, this is the beauty of REST API, it doesn't matter what language. Virtually every programming language has a means to connect by HTTP and grab it back. There's even sets of tools to do this in BASIC, not Visual Basic, BASIC as in what you have on the BBC. Of course, they have no way to connect the internet, that's an entirely irrelevant story, but you can actually do it. And just to prove it can be done in anything, you can even do it in Magento. And in fact, this is a really simple example which was done yesterday, and it's possibly not the best code in it. So in this example, we're opening a curl client, we're setting up a header to say don't push out the HTTP headers. We're calling our example posts, we're going through, we've got the data, blah, 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 decode the data, and we can then do whatever we like with it. Now we could do this with an RSS feed, to be honest, because all I'm doing is hitting the same posts. Until we start thinking about what I could be doing, what else I could be adding this. I could be adding a post meta. I could do that with the RSS feed, but now it's getting more complicated. I can specify a custom post type, I can do quite complex queries against the API to bring back data, specific data I want. So it means that if I'm sharing my news feeds with my Magento site, I can only pull over posts that are related to my Magento site, for example. Yeah, that was just a really basic example. And one of the things that you can do that's also on your own site is using Backbone and Angular apps, which are JavaScript libraries and frameworks that basically use JSON as a means for pulling through their data to what's being shown on the page. And this really allows you to create platform-independent themes. NoBackend.org is a site that's devoted to this idea of having sites that are independent of whatever the backend is. So in theory, Because, for example, Drupal also has a REST API, Magento has a REST API of sorts. We could, in fact, be building sites and themes that are just entirely a backbone or Angular that could connect up to any data source at the back end, whether that's WordPress, Drupal, or Magento. In reality, we'll probably want something that's WordPress specific, but it's a nice idea that we could be doing completely independent of actually there. And if you really want to go insane, you can delete wp-admin and go into wp content and delete your themes folder. WordPress still works. I don't say function, I say works. It's not the best experience you'll ever have, but we could completely rewrite through the API. We can do basic tasks that we can do in the admin area, and we don't have we can pull the data in so we don't need a themes folder. That would completely revolutionise the way we work with WordPress. That's a nice scary thought for you. All people who've just got comfortable with using themes. I come along and say, right, we're going to put in JavaScript now. Actually, that's a terrifying thought. Let's move on. Mobile. As a demonstration in Newcastle, and my laptop unfortunately has died completely, so you're not going to get the final product, I'm afraid, because I'm using a spare laptop. But I built a mobile app in Newcastle. It wasn't a very impressive app, I have to say. It was done in PhoneGap. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's an Apache project, or Apache Condoma is the Apache project. And it takes HTML, JavaScript, and CSS and combines it together and builds a native app for you. It's really simple to use, the build process is dead easy. And you can make native calls. For example, this is a bit of jQuery that's grabbing the posts. It's pinging them in, we've got into a UL list and putting them on the LI, putting LI in front of them, giving them the title and the value, which generates you something like this. And then you can use something called top code, which is just a CSS style sheet. You apply that, you go hit build, and now we've got the mobile app. I will point out my mobile app is just a list with the name and the page. It's probably not the most functional app ever in the world, but I did point out the whole thing, including the build process, which was a long bit, did take me 10 minutes and I did it live in front of people. Which is probably one of the first times I've actually done live coding and not worried it was going to break because it was that simple. That's how cool it is. So 10 minutes you could build a phone app. About 6 years. And I'll probably come back going, WordPress, I've never heard of that. Sharing user information. Something to talk about. For those of you who don't know, I used to do a lot of work for membership sites. And oh yes, I love membership sites. But my goal, and one of the things that we talked about 5 years ago when we were developing membership sites, was the idea that we shouldn't actually build membership sites, we should build membership API systems. We should build a REST API that allow the interaction across multiple sites, allow payment data to be passed across, allow personal information to be passed across, allow users to be passed from one site to the other. And then we should get out of the actual providing content game. We can do that now. It's complicated, but you can do that with the API. The users, there's enough control and management for users who can pass information across, you can pass the metadata across. So what about extending the WP API? I'm going to use an example of becoming an OEmbed provider, which is one of those things that I really wish I hadn't, because now I have to explain what OEmbed is. So OEmbed, for those of you who don't know, is a really neat little system. Basically, when you go into WordPress and you go and put a YouTube link into a post, have you ever noticed that we seriously YouTube appears? The video appears in the iframe, and you can press play and go. How that works is through OEmbed. So how it works is that the website looks up, oh yeah, I've got an OEmbed provider for YouTube. It then fires a call to YouTube's REST API and says, hey, I've got this URL, do you want to return me interesting information about this URL? And he goes, yes, sure, I'll return you some HTML. How about this video player? And it returns the video player, which then appears on your site. It's an amazing idea, it's brilliant. And if we all trusted the web, it would be absolutely beautiful. We don't all trust the web, it would be a terrifying thought. you really shouldn't do some of the things that I've been suggesting you do. If you want to learn more, I wrote a blog post on it about a month ago called Becoming an OEmbed Provider. It's well worth a read, if only to terrify yourself. But here's how you can become an OEmbed provider, which conveniently uses the REST API. So in this function, all we're doing, we're adding the action to the WP-JSON serve before serve. Basically, before we actually start doing anything, run this function, and all we're doing is adding a filter that's adding a new endpoint, and we're adding that to register routes. Register routes function, there you go, adding a route. Nothing spectacularly horrifying here, and we're telling it to put a point into the array, then return that. Oops, probably go back and go. The important thing is this line here that's hidden, which is inside my class. When you actually hit this /OEmbed, please come and go to get URL in my class. Get URL in my class. I've skipped most of the rubbish that we don't want to hear about, but I can show you if you want. The important bit is this. Create a new response object. The API does it all for you. It's wonderful. No having to format your JSON, no having to worry about what's going to be there. It's beautiful. You just tell it, create a new JSON response object. You throw the data at it. You just literally throw the data at it. It doesn't really matter what format you throw it in either. Right, you can throw an object, you can throw an array. It gets a bit busy as a string, but you can still do it, and it will return a reasonable response back. And that's it. That's all you need to do to become an OEmbed provider. So, what's the future? Right now, this is functional. You can go and use this today in its plugin form. It has, it's at a state where the